I still remember the way the doorbell sounded that morning. One short ring, then another, like someone rehearsing patience. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and opened the door to find Karen standing there with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was holding a pale envelope between her fingers, the kind of careful gesture meant to suggest grace. "Marianne," she said brightly, "I thought I'd drop this off myself. Gavin's been swamped at work." Her tone was smooth, polite, almost too polite. She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her, glancing around my small living room as though she were inspecting a model home that had seen better days. The morning light fell across the framed photos of Gavin through the years, his 8th grade science fair ribbon, his college graduation. She didn't look at any of them for long. I offered her coffee, but she declined. "I can't stay," she said. "Just wanted to make sure you got this." She handed me the paper, folded twice. No envelope after all. It wasn't an invitation like I expected, just a handwritten note, an address, a time, and the words "private ceremony," written in tidy looping script. "I thought Gavin might call about this," I said carefully. "Oh, he's so buried with work right now," she replied, waving it off. "He asked me to take care of it." Something in her voice carried a practiced calm, a tone that discouraged questions. I nodded anyway, thanking her, and watched as she left in a cloud of perfume and silence. When I shut the door, the house felt smaller than it had before. I took the paper to the kitchen, smoothed it out, and pinned it under the magnet, shaped like a sunflower on my refrigerator. For a long moment, I just stood there looking at it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Too neat for Gavin, who always rushed through notes. That night I sat by the window with the radio off, the paper still on my mind. Karen hadn't asked how I was. She hadn't even looked at me when she spoke. Still, I told myself it was nothing. She'd gone out of her way to deliver it. Maybe that meant something good. Maybe. Looking back, there were signs. I just didn't want to see them. When Karen started planning the wedding, I asked Gavin if he or she needed help. Place cards, favors, anything. He smiled and said it was all under control. Later, I offered to help fold the programs. Karen said her friends were already doing it and thanked me with a voice too sweet to trust. I waited for updates. A group text had been going around. I only knew because Eliza, my neighbor's daughter, showed me a photo from it once. I was never on it. "Maybe they forgot your number," Eliza had said gently. I nodded like that was enough of an explanation. Gavin wasn't himself those last few weeks. He called less, and when he did, it felt like he was trying to convince himself everything was fine. I thought maybe it was nerves. Weddings make people strange. But that morning, I woke early. The sun hadn't broken the horizon yet. I ironed my soft green blouse, one I had saved for special occasions. Slacks, sensible low heels, hair pinned up, lipstick applied slowly. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "You're ready," just to calm the part of me that wasn't. At 10:30, I called the taxi. I didn't want to be rushed. I wanted to get there early, maybe see Gavin before the ceremony. I still imagined being part of it, helping someone tie a ribbon, carrying extra bobby pins in my purse. The driver was a quiet man in his 40s. I handed him the paper with the address. He glanced at it and frowned. "This area," he said, "I know it pretty well. Not much out there. That address looks like an old post office site, if I'm remembering right." I asked him to go anyway. He gave me a look in the mirror, like he wanted to ask more questions, but he didn't. The cab rolled forward, and the city fell behind us. Dust started gathering along the road edges. I kept one hand in my lap, the other pressing gently over my purse, as if I could steady myself through contact alone. The road cracked more with every mile, like it was giving up under the weight of the sun. Dust blew against the windows of the taxi, and the farther we went, the more the world around us unraveled into empty stretches and rusted-out fences. No flower arrangements, no valet, no soft music floating from open doors, just abandoned buildings and a few sunburned signs that pointed nowhere. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror. "Ma'am," he said finally, "are you sure this is the right place? This stretch hasn't seen a wedding in years." I pulled out the folded note and checked it again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves and make more sense. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. I opened my phone. 1 bar. I called Gavin once, then twice. Straight to voicemail. I sent a message. "I'm here, but I don't see anything. Can you call me?" No reply. By 3:15, the sinking feeling had already settled into my stomach. Whatever I was meant to witness, it had started without me. or it never would at all. I tapped the driver's shoulder and asked him to take me to the largest church in town. "Maybe they'll know," I said. "Maybe it started late." The church sat quiet and dignified under the shade of old cottonwoods. I stepped out, adjusted my blouse, and walked toward the front doors. A priest was locking up. "Excuse me," I asked, "is there a wedding here today?" He smiled kindly. "Not today, ma'am. We haven't had one booked for this week." I stood there a second longer than I needed to, then walked to the front steps and sat down. My blouse clung to my back. The lipstick I'd applied that morning had faded to a dull line. I looked down at my hands, trembling now, and thought of Gavin as a boy, handing me wildflowers through the kitchen window. I closed my eyes against the sting in my chest. The driver waited in the car. I didn't ask him to leave, not yet. Somewhere, someone had planned this. When I stepped back into my house, the silence was too sharp to ignore. I peeled off my shoes by the door and stood in the kitchen, staring at the magnet still holding Karen's note in place. It felt like a joke now, a cruel handwritten joke. I walked across the lawn to my neighbor's house. Gloria answered in her usual pink cardigan, and I didn't even need to explain. One look at my face and she brought me inside. Her granddaughter Leia was visiting for the weekend. She was maybe 16, sharp as a tack and faster with a phone than anyone I knew. "Let me check," Leia said, pulling up a browser. "There are a few places that host weddings around here. I'll find out what's booked today." She rattled off a list of 5 venues. I copied each address on the back of a grocery receipt with shaking hands. Then I called a new taxi. I didn't talk much during the ride, just held that list like it might disintegrate if I blinked. The first venue was empty. We didn't even stop the car. The second was decorated with balloons and cartoon characters, a child's birthday, not a wedding. The third had a locked gate and no signs of life. My hands started to sweat. I wiped them on my skirt and told the driver to try the fourth. As we turned the corner onto a winding driveway, I saw them. Dozens of cars lined up under oaks. White ribbons fluttered from fence posts. Music, soft and classical, floated out across the lawn. I leaned forward in my seat. "There," I said, "stop there." I opened the door before the car had fully stopped and stepped out onto the gravel in my low heels, almost stumbling in my rush. People in suits and dresses milled about near the entrance. Servers walked past with trays. There were flowers, laughter. This was it. This had to be it. I started toward the entrance, heart pounding, when a man in a dark jacket stepped into my path and raised a hand. The man blocking my way wore a black blazer and an earpiece. He held out a flat hand, like I was a stranger trying to sneak in. "Private event," he said, "invitation only." "I'm the groom's mother," I answered, my voice dry from dust and nerves. He looked me over, hesitant. Maybe it was the sweat on my collarbone or the worn-out shoes. Maybe it was the disbelief in my own tone. "Do you have a name?" he asked. "Marianne Hollis," I said quickly. "My son is Gavin Hollis." He didn't move, just stared like he didn't quite buy it. I pulled the crumpled piece of paper from my purse, unfolded it with shaky fingers and held it out to him. "She gave me this," I said. "His fiancée, 2 weeks ago." He glanced at it, shrugged. "Doesn't match what's on the list." I opened my mouth to say more when I heard it. Gavin's voice. It was unmistakable, light and familiar, drifting out over the crowd, wrapped in laughter. I turned toward the sound. He stood near the front, chatting with 2 other men, hands in his pockets, completely unaware. I stepped around the guard and called out his name. "Gavin!" He looked up, and for a moment nothing moved. Then his face changed. The smile dropped. His shoulders tensed. "Mom!" he called, already stepping toward me. He jogged over, eyes wide, voice lowering as he got close. "What happened? You're soaked. Why didn't you come to the church earlier?" I held out the paper. My hand trembled. "Karen gave me this," I said quietly. "Said it was from you." He took it, read it once, then again. I watched his expression shift. First confusion, then disbelief, then something colder. He looked at me like the ground had moved under his feet. "Wait here," he said. Then he turned and walked quickly toward the main building, the paper still clenched in his hand. Gavin came back after a few minutes and took my hand gently, guiding me to a bench under a tree near the parking area. He pulled a bottle of water from a cooler nearby and handed it to me. "Drink this," he said. His voice was tight, controlled. I took a few sips while he sat beside me, elbows on his knees, staring at the gravel. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning." So I did. I told him about Karen showing up alone, handing me the note, saying he was too busy. I told him about memorizing the address, taping it to my fridge, getting dressed early, and driving through miles of nothing. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly, jaw clenched. "Wait here," he said. "I need to talk to her." Then he stood still, holding the wrinkled paper, and walked back toward the building. From where I sat, I could see people inside, still mingling, servers walking around, music playing softly. Then it stopped, just like that. No announcement, no warning, just silence thick enough to press against the glass. I waited. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching the light shift through the trees. 15 minutes later, Gavin came back alone. His jacket was off, slung over his shoulder, his tie pulled loose at the collar. "She lied to you," he said quietly, "and she lied to me." He sat beside me again and looked straight ahead. I asked to see her phone. I knew the passcode. I didn't think twice. He didn't have to say more, but he did anyway. There were messages to her friends, screenshots. She said you'd be a distraction, that if she sent you far enough, we could avoid the drama. I didn't say a word. Gavin ran a hand through his hair. "It wasn't an accident," he said. "The address, the timing, it was all planned." He didn't sound angry. Not anymore, just hollow. "She wanted you gone," he said. "But now she's the one who has to explain why I'm not inside." Gavin stood slowly after telling me what he'd seen, like every step forward would pull him deeper into something final. He didn't say much after that, just walked back toward the building with a steadiness I hadn't seen in him before. I stayed where I was, but I could hear the shift. Voices inside rose, uneasy and sharp. The music didn't start again. Someone shouted, then hushed. Later, he told me how it unfolded. He'd gone back in, walked straight up to the officiant, and said quietly, "You won't be needed today." Karen had seen him first, her face pale, lips parted, dress flawless. She'd stepped forward, confused, then desperate. Asked him what was wrong, said she didn't understand. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse. He held up the paper she gave me and said, "You knew exactly what this was." Karen had tried to talk over him. Her father jumped in, demanding that they settle it after, insisting the ceremony go on. But Gavin looked at the crowd, the flowers, the aisle lined with petals. "We're not doing this," he said. Just like that, he walked past the chairs, past the altar, past the cake someone had spent hours decorating. And when I saw him coming toward me again, alone, something inside me braced for the weight of it. He didn't cry. I didn't either. When he reached me, he just said, "Let's go home." So we did. We walked together to the car waiting by the curb, the driver still watching, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Gavin opened the door for me first. I slid in without a word, and as the car pulled away, from the ribbons, from the silence, from the frozen image of a day that would never become memory, I rested my hand gently over his. He didn't pull away, not this time. The first message came that same night, then another, then 6 more by morning. "It was a mistake. I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt her. Please call me." Gavin read them all in silence. Then he set the phone down, face down on the counter, and walked out back to trim the hedges. He never replied. I didn't ask if he wanted to. Some wounds aren't meant to be discussed. They just need space to settle without pressure. In the days that followed, he went back to work early and stayed late. He drank more coffee than he used to and came home quieter. Still, he came home. I started making dinner again, not because I was hungry, but because it gave us something to sit across from. Chicken and rice, stew, a salad with too much vinegar. We didn't talk about what happened. Not for a while. Instead, we talked about work. A client who wouldn't return his emails, a neighbor who left her sprinklers running too long. Once I burned the toast and blamed the toaster. He smirked. The next night, he brought home bagels. It was slow, but something softened between us. 3 months passed before we heard about Karen. A friend of Gavin said she'd moved to Chicago, got a job with a tech startup, left town fast. No one asked her to stay. Gavin didn't say much when he heard, just nodded and kept driving. We were on our way to the grocery store. He reached for a bag of oranges, held one up like he was testing its weight. "She always bought clementines," he said suddenly. I didn't know what to say to that. He put the orange back in the bin, picked another one. We drove home in quiet again. Not cold, not heavy, just quiet. That night, he washed the dishes without being asked. I dried them, and when I turned to put away the glasses, I noticed he'd left his phone on the table. Screen up. No messages, no missed calls, nothing left to explain. 2 years passed, the kind that slipped by gently, marked more by small changes than milestones. Gavin changed apartments at work. I repainted the kitchen. Life didn't rush. It just settled. He met Eliza through a friend of a friend. She taught math at the local high school and wore glasses that always slid down her nose when she laughed. He didn't bring her around right away, but when he did, she brought banana bread and a tiny bouquet she'd picked from her own garden. I liked her before she even spoke. The surprise came when she asked me to brunch, just the two of us, before their second date. "I want to know the woman who raised him," she said. We ate at a small cafe with chipped mugs and sunlight on the table. She asked about Gavin's childhood, about what he was like as a boy. She listened, really listened. And when Gavin told me he planned to propose, it was Eliza who called me the next morning. "We want to do it here," she said. "In your backyard, if that's okay." Of course it was. They hung string lights and borrowed folding chairs. Gavin mowed the grass twice. Eliza baked her mother's apple cake and insisted on setting every plate herself. That afternoon, as the sun dropped low over the fence, Gavin stood beside her, holding the ring. And just before he spoke, Eliza reached out for my hand. She didn't ask permission. She didn't whisper something for show. She just held it. When Gavin finished his short, careful speech, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I never had a mother like you," she said, "but I hope I can learn." There were no hidden messages, no backroom deals, just people in the open, choosing one another without fear. I said yes before she even asked. And later that evening, while the cake was being passed and the backyard glowed with soft light, Gavin looked over at me and smiled, like nothing had ever been missing. And for the first time in years, nothing was. The morning of Gavin's wedding, I woke up before the sun and sat for a while in the quiet. The air was still cool, the house hushed, like it understood the day was meant to be held gently. I dressed slowly, smoothing the fabric of the slate-gray dress Eliza helped me choose. "Elegant," she'd said, beaming like someone who built the foundation. The venue wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. It was a converted greenhouse just outside of town, simple, airy, full of soft light and the scent of clean earth. I was seated in the front row near the aisle, next to Eliza's aunt and Gavin's best friend from college. When the music began, the doors opened and Eliza appeared. The whole room seemed to pause. She didn't look at this crowd. She looked at Gavin. And he turned toward me first, just briefly. His eyes shimmered and he nodded once. Not a big gesture, just enough. During the vows, Gavin's voice cracked. He took Eliza's hands and said the words clearly, then added something that wasn't in the script. "I am the man I am because of the woman who raised me," he said softly, "and I wouldn't be here today without her." Heads turned slightly toward me, but I didn't need the attention. I already had everything. After the ceremony, I wandered the edge of the garden alone, while the guests moved inside for the reception. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes. A breeze lifted the edges of the linen tablecloths. I stopped under an arch of climbing ivy and looked out across the rows of chairs now half empty. I didn't think about the address Karen gave me, the one that led to nothing but dust and silence. I thought about this one, the right address, the place where my son waited for me, where the door opened, where the seat was saved, where the life we rebuilt had a name, and it wasn't shame or bitterness or pretending. It was peace, and it was love. For the first time in so long, I felt it not as something distant or borrowed, but as something living and breathing in the same space as me. Later, as twilight deepened and laughter floated from the greenhouse, Gavin found me there under the ivy. "You disappeared," he said gently. "I was just taking it in," I smiled. He looked around at the chairs, the lights, the way the last of the sun pooled across the lawn. "It's perfect," he said. "It is," I agreed. He hesitated, then added quietly, "You know, I used to think that day ruined everything. The first wedding." I shook my head. "No, Gavin, it just cleared the way for the real one." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. We stood there for a while longer, saying nothing, just listening to the faint hum of conversation and the wind stirring through the trees. When he finally turned to go back inside, he glanced over his shoulder. "Thank you, Mom," he said. And then he was gone, swallowed by the golden light spilling from the greenhouse. I stayed outside until the stars came out, the air cool against my skin, the night soft and sure around me. For years I had feared the empty places, the silences left behind. But now, standing there under the ivy, I realized silence could also mean peace. It wasn't about what I'd lost, it was about what had found its way back.